In this chapter, we're going to take a look at getting started creating our own custom theme. If you'll remember from the presentation earlier, the first step in creating a theme for Drupal is defining a .info file for our theme. In order to do that, we need to switch over to our Drupal file structure. Inside of the Drupal sites directory, inside of the all directory, inside of themes, we're going to create a new directory for our theme, and inside of that we'll place our .info file and all the additional files that are part of our theme. So the first thing I want to do is create a new directory. I want to name our theme 960 Robots. You might think the easiest thing to do would be able to name it the number 960 Robots, like so. But I know that this won't work for Drupal because theme names need to start with alphabetic characters. Numeric characters won't work because there are going to be instances where we need to create function names that start with the name of our theme, and in PHP you can't define a function that starts with a number. So instead of the numbers 960 robots, I'm actually going to name it 960 robots. The name of the directory isn't actually all that important. Inside of it is just going to be all of the files for our themes, and we could hypothetically name this directory whatever we wanted to. The important thing is going to be the name of the info file that we create inside of the directory. Usually what you'll see though is that the directory name here, 960 robots, will correspond to the name of our .info file, 960robots.info. I'm going to open up my text editor and create a new file, and then I'll just start by saving that file into that new directory we just created, sites, all, themes, in my 960 robots directory, and I'm just going to call this 960robots.info. I've now got a .info file for my theme. It's important to note that whatever you name your .info file here, in our case 960robots.info, is what will become the machine-readable name for your theme in all of Drupal. This will be important when we get into things for step 3 in the advanced theming series related to the template.php file. Inside of our .info file, there are 3 things that are absolutely required. The first is the name property. We need to give our name a theme, and this is the human readable name of our theme. So I'm going to name our theme 960 Robots. In this case, I can use any characters that I want to, as this is just going to be text that's displayed to administrators when they go to enable the theme. I also need to include a description, and I need to tell Drupal which version of Drupal core my theme is compatible with. So I'll add the core equals 7.x line. This says my theme, 960 Robots, is compatible with all versions of Drupal 7. Now, when I save my .info file, I've added the 3 required lines, given it a name, and if I go back over to my site, I should see under the Appearance tab, our new 960 Robots theme show up as something that we can actually turn on and enable. Down here you'll see, we've got the 960 Robots theme. We haven't added a screenshot yet or anything other than just the .info file and those 3 required properties, but I can turn on this theme and set it as the default, which I'm going to do now. I'll click Enable and Set to Default. And then when I close the overlay and the page gets refreshed, you'll see our Drupal page output using our new 960 Robots theme. Doesn't look like much yet, but we'll get there. One thing that's pretty cool about this though is that all we did was create that .info file. And what we're seeing right here is all of Drupal's default output. This is really cool because you can start to get an idea of the way that Drupal outputs things by default and then what HTML you might want to change or need to change in order to create your own custom theme. We can take a quick look at the source code here. And you'll see that Drupal is doing things like adding a bunch of style sheets to the page. These are mostly for system administration pages, like the menus administration and the appearance page that we just looked at, and so forth. It's also adding a bunch of JavaScript files to the page. And then it's creating all of this default HTML markup that is our page. The body tag here, for example, a skip link element up at the top of the page, and then it starts to get into the navigation and content of our page. I think that this is really powerful because it gives us the opportunity to do things like create themes in Drupal that are really just CSS files. Right now we've got a .info file and all of Drupal's default markup, and if you take a look at the markup, you'll notice that it's actually pretty nice. The body tag here, for example, has this class attribute with a bunch of different contextual classes on it. It tells me things like I'm currently viewing the front page, and the user that's viewing the front page is logged in. The type of page is a node, and so forth. This is nice. Then with CSS, I can do some pretty powerful things without actually having to override any of the template files in Drupal. So that's Drupal's default HTML markup. The next thing I want to do is take a look at how we can use our .info file to add CSS files to the page here. So right now, our theme is being used, but it's not actually including or printing out any of our CSS files. If I switch back over and take a look at the CSS files that were provided to us by the designer with a mockup of our theme inside of the 960 robots HTML directory here, you'll see that there's 3 of them: 960.css, main.css, and reset.css. What I'd like to do is copy this entire directory over to my new theme in Drupal and include all of these CSS files on the page whenever someone views it. So I'll copy this directory over to sites all themes inside of the 960 robots theme. I'll go ahead and just paste that directory with all of the CSS files in it. In order for those files to get included on the page, what I want to do is edit my .info file and tell it about the existence of these CSS files. So I'm going to switch back to my text editor, and I'm going to start adding some new lines to this .info file. The lines that I want to add are the style sheets here, which will add in our reset.css, 960.css, and main.css. You'll also notice that in our theme, I put all of the CSS files inside of a subdirectory of the 960 robots directory. This helps me keep my theme nice and organized, but I need to remember that when I'm adding style sheets via the .info file, to include that subdirectory as part of the path to this CSS file. So what I'm doing here is saying I'd like to include these 3 CSS files. They're in the subdirectory of CSS, and for each of them, I'd like it to be printed to the page using a link element with an attribute, a media attribute, that has a value of all. Once I've added those lines to the .info file, I can save it. I need to switch back over to my site. And I can refresh the page, and you'll notice that nothing actually happened. The reason for that is that the contents of that .info file are cached by Drupal. When I first viewed the page and it loaded the 960 robots theme for the first time, it read in all of those values from our .info file and then cached that information. That way, Drupal doesn't need to read the .info file for every single page load, as that would just slow things down. It does mean that when I make changes to my .info file, I need to clear my cache. Good thing we added this handy link to our shortcuts up here. I'll click Performance, and then I'll say Clear Caches, and then close the overlay and let the page get refreshed. And there you go. Now our theme is actually really starting to look like our design mockup. You can see that our CSS was applied. It's pretty obvious. The background color changed, the title changed. You can see it started to change how links look and how titles of our different pieces of content and so forth look throughout the theme. It's still not perfect, but it's getting there. If I take a look at the source code, you'll see that our theme's CSS files are now being included as part of the page, right here. We've got the reset.css, we've got the 960.css file, which is providing the base 960 grid system, and then we've got our main.css, which is providing all of the different background colors, link colors, and so forth that we're seeing currently on the page. So all we did was add to our .info file the names of these style sheets and the media so that it knows this should use the media type of all for these style sheets. And then Drupal went ahead and automatically included them on the page for us. That's awesome. This also means that Drupal knows about our style sheets. So when it comes time to put our site into production, we can turn on the CSS aggregation, which will take all of the CSS files on the page and aggregate them into a single file, which is much quicker for browsers. That's really nice too. All we have to do is add it to the .info file. Drupal takes care of the rest for us. The next thing that we're going to need to do is start figuring out how to modify some of this default HTML output by Drupal so that it works with the CSS that we're including on the page and things begin to take shape and start to really look like our mockups.